Episode 143, Who Rocked the Jar?
You're listening to the very best podcast in the world on health, wealth, and happiness. Please remember to leave a review and share with all your friends and family. And here is your host, Lars Hilser.
Actually, he's right here. Not that early. Welcome to the 143rd episode of the very best podcast in the world, your only source in the universe for personal supremacy through health, wealth, and happiness. Now, those of you who aren't anointed yet, the reason I'm chuckling pretty much every, by the way, Monday through Friday, 12 o'clock noon, high noon, when the sun is highest in the sky, in England, at 12 GMT, a new episode is released, every weekday because I have a weekend and it's holy-ish. So the reason I am chuckling, for those of you who have, just tuned in for the first time, is because this delivery vehicle of good news started out as a sarcastic bitch to jizz in the faces of all of these motherfuckers who want to ass rape your wallet for your money in promise to and they promise to return, a much improved life. This show was supposed to be a persiflage against them, and actually turned into something I hadn't anticipated. I think there is no country on earth that hasn't at least downloaded one of the episodes of the very best podcast in the world. And the feedback that I get, mainly via email, is overwhelmingly positive, and a lot of encouragement to keep the show going. And so therefore, and without further ado, we're going to talk today about who rocked the jar. Well, let's not start right there, because I promised that I would get on your fucking nerves every day until you start sharing these episodes with people who may need them in their life. And now yesterday, we went into the 11 mistakes new investors make. If you haven't listened to that, look for episode 142 on the very best podcast in the world.com. And that episode has been shared a significant number of times. I actually forgot to look and prepare the number. However, even within 24 hours of the release, the feedback's been overwhelming, and there are a lot of people who fell victim to some of these Wall Street bets, pump and dumps that were going on, and kind of in reluctance reported back and said, had I listened to this episode, I would have probably decided a bit differently. So something good done, check. Today's episode is more on the global galactic social experiment going on, and carries the title Who Rocked the Jar, simply because an example I read many, many years ago. I haven't been in the woods to prove that if you pick 100 red ants and 100 black ants out of their ant mounds, hives, I don't know, what do you call it? Where do they live? The suburban forest, whatever. And, you put them in a jar. 100 of each, 100 red ants, 100 black ants. And that they supposedly, presumably, peacefully coexist until such a point that you rock the jar and you shake it, and they start beating the shit out of each other because each side thinks that the other side is responsible for this earthquake in a jar that was going on, while in fact, it was you, bitch, who shook the jar and got them into the commotion that they're in. But they lack the intellectual capacity, of course, to determine that it was you. Now, I know little about ants, but I imagine this experiment could be very interesting to perform, even though why take the ants out of their habitat? Blah. No, not going to do it. Sorry. Eco hippies, don't come at me. It's not going to happen. I'm assuming, of course, what is on the internet is true. So I'm assuming that this experiment has been done, and therefore I'm not going to repeat it. However, and this is where we get to this point of global galactic social experiment. And the reason kind of I chose this was reinforced by today's or yesterday's shooting of another black person in the United States, where a woman police officer, instead of pulling her taser, pulled a gun and instead of tasing the dude, actually shot him. So while it's not really funny, the circumstances, if you've ever held a gun in your hand, and obviously she was issued a Glock, which doesn't have a conventional safety. And if you've ever held a taser in your hand, you know that the safety is kind of in a totally different position. And so mistaking a gun for a taser, I don't know. You would have to be pretty much of a fucking idiot to perform a stunt like that. Seriously, trust me. If you haven't, go to your local gun shop, take a Glock into your hand, and take a taser into your hand, and then see how the safety performs. And if you're not a totally fucking idiot, in any case, you shouldn't be on any police force. That shouldn't happen. You know, I've worked under stressful situations. If you're not professional enough to determine the instrument that you've got in your hand, you know, you kind of don't deserve to be on a on any type of organization where you've got that type of power in your hand. Anyhow, shit went ablaze again, and stern warnings were issued by Granddaddy Biden, and that there was to be no looting and whatever, no outrage, and you know, everything's going to be good. History repeats itself in a lot of cases. However, it goes to it spills oil into the fire of the already polarized world. And I think it must have been 2016 when the whole thing kind of got to its zenith. There were two events in 2016 where you went to bed and you thought the people couldn't be that loony, right? Number one, it was the Brexit that happened. That was, you know, by a very narrow margin, but it happened. Number two, it was the election of Donald Trump, where you said, okay, you know, interesting thing to happen. Then years later, if you haven't watched the documentary on Netflix called The Great Hack, which explains in detail how the more or less devious company called Cambridge Analytica, which was in everybody's mouth, utilized huge amounts of data to manipulate the masses in a significant way. And it was portrayed as that this organization was, at least in major parts, responsible for the outcome of these two events and many others on the planet. And then a year or so later, you had another documentary, the name of which I have forgotten, produced by Tristan Harris, which was about how social media isn't about giving you unbiased information or being in touch with your friends. No, it's about making fucking money. And anyone who still believes that an operation like Facebook or Twitter or something runs for free, they don't. Seriously, servers cost shitloads of money. I mean, the hardware that I have here is quite pricey to produce this little itty bitty podcast that gets listened, by a few thousand people, right? But running an operation like that costs shitloads of money that you have to somehow generate. And so, yeah, they're not a non-for-profit, so they want to make a profit. And the more profit they can make, you get where I'm going to, right? In this perverse Anglo-capitalistic system that we live in, interesting things happen when when the talk is about profit maximization. So, long story, very motherfucking short. This polarization that we're living through, and the thereby chance that very rhetorically perverse people like Donald Trump, like Le Pen in France, like the phenomenon of the AfD in Germany, they all have their root somewhere. And this, if you still haven't gotten the bigger picture, is a huge combination. Not any big conspiracy theory or cabal being added, but economic powers shifting the minds and manipulating the minds of billions of people, including you, to think and to form your way of thinking. And that's where the whole thing took its course. And it's a very sorry peak in the result in the Black Lives Matter movement springing up, and as a result of the George Floyd thing going on, and so on and so forth. So it's about men versus women. It's about left versus right. It's about rich versus poor. It's about faith versus science. It's about gossip and rumors, and nothing about common fucking sense. This factor is taken entirely out of the equation. We've had this thing going on with men versus women, or, more accurately in today's world, the other 27 genders in between that that supposedly do exist. Then we have the left versus the right. We have Donald Trump, the 27-dimension chess-playing master of cabal annihilating savior of the world, with the QAnon movement. And on the other extreme, we have the camp of Biden, and that he's a puppet of the Obama administration leftovers and think and whatever, the very liberal and quote unquote socialist approach, the left. Then we have the rich versus the poor, where it's about the equality and the 1% and the 99%. And we've got the faith versus science, which is, very acute now in the COVID times. And we have so much polarization in the fucking world just because common sense and self-thinking has been entirely removed from the equation. So getting back to the example with the poor ants that we stuck in a jar, theoretically, a quarter of an hour ago, we have to ask ourselves the question, especially in this polarized world, and before we start to fight each other, who rocked the fucking jar? And with that quote, I think we're going to wrap this show up. Boy, I got on tours there. So in that sense, have a successful day, a successful rest day of your Wednesday, or a successful start. And if your Wednesday is as good as over and you're listening to this, have a good night. And we'll be back in touch tomorrow. We're going to be speaking about worrying versus fixing things. No DIY. You don't have to take a hammer in your hand. In that sense, folks, peace out, and let's be in touch tomorrow.